Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm joined by Michael Phillips from the Richmond Times Dispatch as we discuss the news of when the new name will be announced. It's February 2nd. We spent only a few minutes on that because how much can you really go over it, but we did have some discussion about it before we then dissected Ron Rivera's comments from Monday, some of which were revealing about the direction of the team and Chase Young's development. Some good insight for you. Also, for what it's worth, we did not discuss the name Admirals, which became an internet rumor this morning or maybe later in the morning. However, I'll be honest, I kind of like that name, so we'll see. Stay tuned for February 2nd. You can follow Michael on Twitter at MichaelPRTD, and you can read my work on ESPN.com. You can follow me on Instagram as well at John Keim, ESPN. Before I share my conversation, I wanted to share some of what I learned after watching the game from Sunday. Now, I haven't watched the entire game at this point, but I watched some specific plays. I wanted to watch Cole Holcomb and the impact that having another play caller next to him and David Mayo made on him. So I'm going to focus on that position for a minute. And it's something I'll get into later podcasts this offseason as we dig into various topics on this team. But it's important to note the impact Mayo made in the game Sunday. Now, I don't mean that he played at some Pro Bowl level, but to me, it indicated why it's so important to get a strong vet in here to play the middle. Mayo is limited, but he's a solid backup and he knows the position. When Carolina drafted him, I remember Rivera had said this before talking about him, but it was to be a backup to Luke Kuechly, not because he's at that level, but because he can play a similar way, just not to the same level. What stood out to me was how decisive Mayo was. And that's not a word consistently used to describe Cole Holcomb or Jamin Davis when they would play in the middle. And Holcomb, of course, has played there a lot more. Check out the goal line D in the third quarter on the drive in which the Eagles scored their second touchdown where Hurts got tripped, but he made the pitch and they got the touchdown. Mayo impacted the first three plays in that series. On the first one, you see him before the snap, point to Bobby McCain pre-snap to warn him about a block coming from the receiver. On that, because of that, McCain was able to get up and get into the hole. Now, he didn't need to be there because Mayo crashes hard inside and helps make the stop. I mean, McCain had to be there, but he was able to get there. He didn't have to make the stop, but he was in the right spot and wasn't affected by the potential block in part because of Mayo's direction. On second down, Mayo shoots inside and quickly breaks up a double team, but leaves Holcomb free to make the stop in the hole. And on third down, you see Mayo directing the outside to his right as to what to do or what's coming. In fact, the Eagles ran the ball that way. After he points, you see him turn and decisively hit the hole as the ball is snapped. Again, Holcomb was free to get to the ball. So Holcomb runs down the side, makes a stop, but also Mayo clears up the double teams. He gets double teams off of the defensive lineman much quicker than Holcomb has this season. Holcomb could play uncluttered because you had someone else calling the signals. Now, the Eagles scored on fourth down because they quick snapped it. And to be honest, I felt Washington should have called a timeout because apparently they knew what was coming. They were told what was coming. They just weren't in the right position because of the quick snap. And because of that, the Eagles scored. But those first three plays told me how it can look with a strong veteran presence inside and with Holcomb free to play uncluttered. Too often when he's in the play calling role, he hesitates. And even though he got better with that at times this year, you still saw it Sunday when it was he in charge out there, when he was the only linebacker, or when he was next to Davis, then you could still see some of that hesitation. And that's why I think that is a definite priority for Washington this offseason. And like I said, I'll get into more of that and some of the play calling stuff later in other podcasts, but let's move on. Another guy that I like is guard Sadiq Charles. Now, I told you last offseason that his best spot was guard, and that's where he'd play. It's what I had heard from a few people who know him well, but clearly they worked him at tackle too. So there you go. But I'll tell you this again. After seeing him this season, I'd be surprised if he's going to start, it's definitely as a guard. Or at most, he's a backup tackle with primary. He's a swing guy like he was this year. But they really I will tell you this, they like him a lot more at guard after having watched him play. Besides, they have Sam Cosmi at right tackle. They want to re-sign Charles Leno. There's already been contact made about that. So Sadiq Charles wouldn't start at tackle, but he could be a backup there. However, he's shown more physicality inside when playing guard. What he must learn to do is keep his feet moving, but he plays tough inside, and that's where he'll help the most. They do believe that now. Now, when you watch him in pass protection, when he got beat one time on Sunday. It wasn't because he got stoned and driven back. It's because he had this guy and he didn't continue to use his feet. A little bit lazy, I would say, with his feet. Clean that up, and I think you have a guy who can help them inside. Anyway, this episode with Michael ran a touch longer, so that's it from me. After this break, I'll be back with Michael Phillips of the Richmond Times Dispatch as we discuss possible new names, plus dig deep into some of Ron Rivera's comments from Monday, some telling ones that involve Chase Young. Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with Michael Phillips of the Richmond Times Dispatch. I am back with America's podcast guest, Michael Phillips. Michael, originally I was going to have you on to talk about some of what Ron Rivera said on Monday because I thought some of those quotes were interesting. And then we found out today that when the date of the new name will be announced, which is February 2nd. And we know some of the possibilities. I mean, according to Tanya Snyder on the Schefter podcast, she confirmed those 8 that came out. I'm curious, first of all,
we can take it down to 7 now, right?
We can take it down to 7 because
yes,
I was going to say Red Wolves was on that list, and Jason Wright came out and said no dice because of trademark issues. So that was a fan favorite. That is out. So looking at this list, it's Armada, Brigade, Red Hawks, Commanders, Defenders, or football team. Do you have a favorite in that group?
I think we can toss football team too, right?
We can toss football team. Yeah. I mean, listen,
so we're at 6.
It's technically on the list, but yeah, I mean, it's not going to be that.
It's not football team. Do I have a favorite? I don't know if I have a favorite. Maybe Armada. I don't know. I think Armada's got a lot of cool visual stuff you can do with it. The problem being, with all due respect to the Potomac, you're not on the water. It's
right.
Not really a seafaring place. No disrespect to the mighty Potomac, of course. But the stadium, unless it's the RFK site, which I think we agree isn't going to happen, the stadium's not going to be on a body of water.
Right.
We all hear the same rumors, of course, of Commanders. I think whatever it is will grow on people eventually. I don't think there's a full-on dud that will ultimately be rejected. But I think, you look at what the Wizards did, from the Bullets, and there's certainly still a segment of that fan base that will forever view them as the Bullets. And I think they'll forever be the Redskins for a certain, age and demographic of fan around here. I don't think that'll ever change. But, it's all about how cool the stuff looks. I mean,
right.
You think about college football, man, you either have an iconic uniform, you've got an Alabama or an Ohio State or a Michigan where it's iconic, or you better be fresh and cool every week. And so they're not iconic anymore. So they better be fresh and cool when they bring it.
Well, and that's what I'm sure you've had some of these same conversations. To me, the biggest key will be the logo. And probably more so the name, because I think people are going to gravitate to the logo as much as they will the name, because the logo is what's going to sell gear for them. And I think it's going to be what attracts people. So whatever the name is, I think the logo will be maybe a bigger part of it. Do you think?
Oh yeah. You think about the merchandising and all that. So, if you think about, big cities, the baseball hat, has to be classic and iconic, the curly W, I think is a great look for the Nationals and a great look for the city. It represents DC and what it is. New York Yankees, of course, Cleveland with the Block C, Kansas City has the KC. There's a classic element to baseball teams. Football is not constrained by those boundaries. You can be a little bit edgier. You can be a little bit cooler and more progressive with a football logo, I think, than you can in other places. And not to say they need to be outlandish with how they do it, but they're committed to the burgundy and gold. So, you're drawing inside some lines to begin with. But yeah, I don't know. I just think there's so much opportunity here to put some cool stuff in the space. Cause I'm just going to say it. I thought all the football team merchandise was really lame. I don't know that that's anybody's fault, obviously, because it was a quick rollout and you didn't want to invest a lot of energy in that. But I want to wear something cool. Like, I want to rock something that the people that I'll be proud of wearing. And I think there's a big opportunity to do that here.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why it won't be football team, because there isn't a chance to develop anything snazzy and cool off that. And I'm pretty sure they think it's boring. So, but that's
I'm pretty sure it is boring.
Yeah, well, it is, but I think they know that. I think there was an element of fans who wanted to see it continue because they got used to it. But I don't think you can market football team quite the same way you could Commanders. And again, it's the logo that will be a big key in all of this, and that's whether it's again Commanders or I kind of like Red Hawks, but I don't think that's my gut would say if the whole reason with the Red Wolves is is the trademark issue with Wolves. I would think that Hawks would have the same issue.
No question.
Yeah.
Can I hit you with a question? Who's
Sure.
the greatest player in football team history?
John Allen.
Allen, Terry. Look, I mean,
Terry. Yeah, okay.
You got to throw Heineke's name in there because I mean the Tampa game does count. It's not Alex Smith; he didn't play enough.
No.
But
Alex
Smith had the biggest heater in Washington football team history.
There you go. But I think I could go with Terry. That's a good podcast. It's a good podcast. 5-minute quick bonus podcast debate.
That's a good mid-May podcast.
Yeah. The greatest. Yeah. Now that they've changed their name from football team, who was the top 5 greatest moments in football team history?
We're gonna make it to 5.
Let's see. Top 5. Let's see. I guess beating Nate Sudfeld to clinch the division.
Almost beating Tom Brady is legit a top 5 moment in football team history.
I think the dive for the pylon.
Yeah.
I think that would be one. Beating the Bucs here.
How about Terry's catch in week 1 against the Chargers on the sideline?
Yeah.
That one was
well.
great.
I think his catch, the catch against the Bucs would be a huge.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one too.
So,
yeah.
There you go. Now we did it.
We're all,
and there was that. And there was that one
down the rabbit hole.
And then there was that Tress Way punt that was really good.
You were all the way down the rabbit hole, but yeah, it's I don't think any of these names particularly to me stand out. I think it's all in the branding and how cool you make it.
Right.
Like, look, this is where Jason Wright makes his money, man. Like, he is a businessman. He has worked at consulting firms. Like, what is this if not the ultimate consulting and rebranding project right here that millions of people are going to see?
Well, the other thing too is the fact that they announce this a month in advance. Some other things that have happened here, they did not announce a month in advance. And I wonder if that was a lesson learned. And because here's the other thing, we know that there are potential congressional hearings coming up, possibly. And you want to get ahead of that by saying, we're not doing this as a reaction to that. We're not announcing the name now because Congress is doing this. It's get ahead of it and be proactive with it. And I just wonder if some of that is not due to the Sean Taylor fiasco.
No doubt. And so there's always going to be the they just announced it because they just announced Sean Taylor because of the emails.
Right.
Oh, they just announced the name because the railing fell. But let's call this what it is. There's always something bad happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. By that criteria, they could never announce anything.
You can't wait. You can't wait until it's a quiet space because you might never have an identity.
They just announced it because Curtis Samuel's on the side field again. And if it's the Washington side fields, we're all in trouble.
Smoke machine.
Yeah, the smoke machine. Yes, yeah, very good. But I do think some of that is related to that. And so, what you have to hope if you're a fan, because Jason Wright will be gone from here at some point. This is not, I mean, we all, whether it's next year, 10 years, whenever, fans have to live with this one. So that's why it's important for them to get this right. And it's not just, it can't be a hit and run moment for them. Like this new group comes in, does this and leaves, because everybody else has to live with it for years. Like the Wizards, people still don't like that name, but
look, I take a lot of swings at Dan Snyder. I think a lot of them are justified. But one thing that we have to say in all honesty, he legitimately, deeply, passionately cares about the history, the franchise itself, like the identity. He's not going to let a dud slip through the cracks here. I don't think.
You would think.
You wouldn't think. And this is a thing that matters
Yes.
on a very personal level to him.
Yes.
How this plays out.
And I think that's a very good point. That is one thing that people can bank on. That the guy, we all know about the belt buckle in the 70s and all that, but he truly grew up in this area as a Redskins fan. So he did not want to change the name. So I think whatever it's going to go to, it's going to have to be something that, again, this is the rebranding. This is the first part, because then the next part is going to be the stadium. So they need to build some momentum, but you have to get this right because, and I'll say this as somebody who grew up in Cleveland with the Indians changing their name. As soon as it's announced, you're probably not going to like it because that's now the permanent name. It's like, really? And maybe there's going to be a segment that will like it. And maybe at best you can hope for is probably 50-50. But that's why I say the logo has to then pull you in and be something you can identify with. And then I'll also be curious, like, what are these traditions they want to build off of this? And, you heard some music being played the other day with I don't know if it was an attempt at a new song or something like that after one of the touchdowns, but I don't know if you caught that. There was, but
yeah, and I think to bring it back, you had mentioned Rivera's comments the other day off the top. I think it comes at a really good time, football wise, in the sense of Rivera's already leaning into high expectations for next year's group, which you don't always hear from the coach, and certainly did not hear that from him this year. You heard that from the players this offseason that, the defense was running their mouth all offseason, which we've reminded people of. But
in fairness to the defense, a lot of other people were running it for them too. A lot of us in the media. So it wasn't just them, but they went above and beyond with the record-breaking sack totals. So go on.
No doubt. But Rivera's already leaning into high expectations next year. I don't think that's unfair. I think we've seen a lot of building block pieces, and depending on which way the quarterback thing shakes out this year, I think it's not unfair to think that this could be the year where they kind of push through and get above 500 with them.
And that's what. So let's go into that, because I don't know what much more we can say about a possible name because we don't know what it is. I wanted to get into some of his comments from Monday because it really felt like we still have one more season-ending press conference after the day after the Giants game, but this is how it felt. Like this was a looking ahead, and I don't think we know they're going to go after a quarterback, so we don't need to talk about Kyle Allen and Taylor Heineke, who's going to start, what it means. I think the interesting thing was, here's one of the things you said about the third year. Asked about expectations, should they be high? And he said, if you map things out, you plan things out, this is really what we believe. I don't see why not. I know expectations will be high. I know people will say, well, it's your third season. This is what happens in the third season. I get it. At the end of the day, we have some holes we want to fill, have some players who want to make sure they are the right kind of guys that are going to be out on the field. Believe me, I didn't come here thinking that it's going to be an easy turnaround. And that's kind of what we were just talking about with the third year. And you think that, he seems to be embracing, because and one of the other things he talked about too was in Carolina, his third season was really good. And the first 2 years were very much like these last two. The difference is they had Cam Newton. So
we'll never know how different this year would have been with Fitzpatrick, but with all due respect to him, I'm going to play the hunch that it's not a playoff year.
Not with all that's happened, not with all the other stuff that's happened.
Assuming everything else happens the way it happens, correct. Of course. Yeah, I think the everything else was just too much to overcome anything other than a full elite quarterback would have been needed to
I think maybe the Denver game is different. Maybe a game like that.
Saints game.
So maybe one of the Saints game, it was a defense that had those two crazy bad touchdowns allowed. So that's why I say maybe one of the earlier games would have been a little bit different, and that could have changed things. But I don't think there's a dramatic change either. So yes, you're right.
That Hail Mary might be the worst moment in football team history if we're doing the bottom five.
Yeah. I would say that's without a doubt, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating that the injuries have plagued this franchise for so long, and when you're immersed in, you're like, oh, every other team must be going through this too, but it's really not that way. These guys have kind of led the league in injuries for the better part of the last decade, and certainly in very significant injuries, which is an interesting thing. And you don't hold the past against Ron because he's got new people, but then you note that
Yeah.
trainer was on DEA investigation this year. That didn't help the situation, obviously.
No matter how you want to, no matter how you try to compensate for it, you still lost your top guy, and you lost your top two guys.
But let's run down the list of what you can feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable with the offensive line, even if Sheriff doesn't come back. Yeah. Like you'd love to have another really, great player on the line.
And I think they'll address that in the offseason too. So it's whatever.
Tight end, I feel great about tight end. Logan Thomas and John Bates. That's fine. That's a fine unit.
And I think Seals Jones is a third guy with Sam is still coming on. I think you got some better depth there. Yeah, going in next.
You got something there. Defensive line's fine. I think the secondary's fine, and it's maybe a bit of a hot take, but I think just relative to what you can expect of the NFL, that Fuller is an NFL level player. I think Jackson has settled into it may be a touch overpaid, but certainly NFL starter caliber over the course of the season. And so you say, like, can you address your weaknesses in this offseason? So your weaknesses are quarterback, obviously, big one. You need a second running back. You need somebody behind Gibson, and that's not a knock on Gibson. He can't play 17 games in the NFL at running back.
I think that's too hard to do.
And linebacker, and obviously, the Jamin Davis thing is its own probably hour-long discussion, that you can go in depth on, but that it's not a roster with dozens of holes. It's a roster with a few very prominent
key holes,
but very key holes. But I don't think it's unfixable in one off season either. I think with the right moves, you can get to where you need to be. I didn't mention receiver just because I think if Curtis Samuel plays the full year, we view that differently.
And I think I'll be curious to see if De'Ami Brown takes a leap. I mean, he did. Oh man, sometimes you look too hard for signs of a guy, what he can do. And he had 2 catches in the last. Well, he only had 2 catches. So one was a big catch and one was a nice grab over the middle. And there were some things I liked about that play, but I'm not going to overanalyze one play because it was one play. And the special team stuff, it's good for his competitiveness, but you still need to transfer that to offense. And so we'll see if he develops, because we know Antonio Gandy Golden did not, and we wondered what he was going to be like into a year or two. I think De'Ami Brown has shown more, but not a ton more. So we don't know about that. So I agree with you. I think middle linebacker, I think they will solve that one this offseason. That's a mild take, but I think they'll solve that one. And
that'll melt the snow right there, Jake.
Well, they'll melt it out here because I'm looking at my yard and it's mostly green right now. So we already started the melting process. But then the quarterback obviously will be the toughest one to fill. And that's where it's going to be determined exactly what kind of a step can you take. Are you having to settle for a guy again this offseason, or do you get a guy that you say you can build around for the next 5, 6, 7 years and do something with him? And so I think that'll determine if they go from, let's say, if they beat the Giants from a 7-win team to 10, 11-win team, or can you go beyond that? Or are you just going to be kind of, hoping, like this year, they hope that they could get to 9 or 10 wins with this quarterback group if things broke right. And it didn't. There are too many injuries, too much to overcome, and the margin for error was too small. So, we'll see. Let's see. But I do think, but I agree with you though, overall. I mean, I don't think like the offensive line has good depth. You can get another guy out there, and I'm sure they will. If you lose Sheriff, you have to go get somebody. I think you want a little bit more depth inside. And I think D-line will be interesting, because do you use one of those guys as trade bait for a quarterback? But I still think I'd go out and get another guy too. I'm going to draft a guy or bring another guy in to maybe get with some size in the middle to maybe develop or have as a situational run stuffer type, something like that. But those are I think you can find those guys. I mean, the hardest one will be the quarterback. Yep. And so, but you're right. I mean, a cornerback will be interesting. Does St. Juice come back? What does he do as he develops? Do they bring back McCain? I actually think he played well over the second half of the year. So I would have no problem with that.
I'd bring him back. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you bring Landon back?
The salary makes it very tough, but this is not a team that's going to be in any kind of cap purgatory next year. I think I'd almost let it be Landon's decision rather than the team's decision. Let him know, here's how we're using you. Do you want to be here, or do you want to go make $7 million less somewhere else where they can call you safety?
We'll call you safety. Yeah, sure.
You only want him there if he wants to be there. But if he wants to be there, I think he does bring a lot to the table, and I think we saw glimpses of that as the year went on.
The question I would have then too, this is where you start to do the math with it. First of all, the savings, and I like what he did. I still saw, I thought in that first Eagles game, despite him getting some of those getting some takeaways, he had some issues with his discipline on certain plays, but he also created some takeaways. One was a fortunate bounce, but he was in position to make some plays. But the question I would have for them is, if you think you're going to get a middle linebacker, that means you like Cole Holcomb and you drafted Jamin Davis, are you going to be able to do different things with your base personnel, lessening the need for a guy like Landon as much as they had him this year? That's the one thing I wonder, in which case then you can't pay him what you're paying him, but I still think he adds value here.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing, which is I think both of us, we were asked to make a yes or no prediction, would predict that no, Landon will not be here. But if we're allowed to pick on like 100% scale, I'd give it a 30% chance.
Yeah. Okay, I'm all right with that. All right, so I think another big one was on the OTAs and Chase Young. Basically, without saying Chase has to be here, he talked about how he wants guys to be here for OTAs and how that's where you install things. It's where, see what do you say? It's when we're working together so we can develop this cohesion that you need to go forward. There's a lot of things that come about when you do get together during those 9 weeks that you have as far as OTAs and mini camps are concerned. I mean, I'm assuming when you heard that, you're thinking one guy, correct?
Well, Montez, I guess,
right? Yeah,
Montez is technically two, but
yeah.
yes, that
it
was
was
Chase
mostly,
Young message. Yes. And they're both repped by the same agency,
correct.
and they kind of move in tandem. So I wouldn't think that one would zig and the other zag. The Chase Young thing is fascinating because of the timing of the injury. He is going to be rehabbing it right up until the start of the season. What we saw after Chase Young left was that Jonathan Allen is the true leader of the defense. And you see, Chase Young is still going to move merchandise, and he still needs to be the face of the organization in a lot of ways, at least until you have an elite quarterback in here. I don't think Terry really embraces that role in the same way that Chase does. Like you need to print Chase on the front of the tickets every week to get people excited about who they're going to come see. But if you were to ask those defensive players who's the true heart and soul of the defense and the leader, I think it's John Allen. And that's a interesting balancing act, not an impossible one, but it's an interesting situation if you're the coach to find a way to walk that line.
But it's funny that you say that, because I think one of the things that he talks about cohesion, I think of that D-line group. And I think that that group needs to be more together. And so I think there is chasm would be the wrong word, but I think there's still, Chase with those young guys, I could see being more of a leader than John Allen was. And I don't think it's rare when you have just one leader for a group. And I think you need multiple guys at multiple positions who are leaders at that group. And, but I did wonder about the cohesion aspect of that quote as well.
You got four alphas on that front line there, four first round guys who are used to being the man everywhere they go. I'm not going to make too much of the punch, but it showed you something for sure.
Yeah. And then going back to Sweat and Young, where he said, I think it's for those guys, it's just understanding their fit, the things we do and how they fit them. These guys are dynamic guys that run well and run through contact. That's a big thing for what you do on defense. You want guys that run through contact. That's who these guys are, I think. He also said, I think basically they have to understand who they are. And I thought that was interesting as well. But I think that goes back to what the early part of the season was about, was guys figuring out where they fit in and who they are on defense. And I think, again, Chase Young, and he brought him up. So that one was clearly about those guys. And Chase, I think, started when you'd watch him compared to last year. I mean, people forget how he finished last year as a rookie. He finished really strong. It was legit how well he played. And then he seemed like there were some things that he was working on differently or taking a different approach with his footwork and the stutter steps and all that. But I don't know. How did you process that one?
Yeah. And Chase did a lot of work this offseason. And I always hate to pull Robert into this because we pull Robert into everything. But you just remember Robert standing there, I think 2014, where like, nobody watches more film than me. Like he's like, I watch film for hours every night. And he wasn't lying. He just he just didn't know what he was watching. He
Right.
didn't turn it into results on the field. Like, he was working his butt off. Like, that was never in question. And Chase Young is working his butt off. That's not in question. You see the videos, you see what he's capable of doing. Like, he's working hard, but is he working smart in a way that will benefit the team, or is he working on himself in a way that ultimately is going to create friction when he drops into the lineup?
Yeah, and I think that will be the one thing that I wonder about as he develops, because the guy still has a ton of talent. And listen, as he develops, he can still make plays because, again, we saw it. And I think when he would just rush and just like, and Rivera talked about that, big guys run well, running through contact. That's what they want him to be. That's your strength right now. As you develop your moves or a few moves, play to your strengths. And I think that's what it is. But speaking of the moves, like, that's what it's funny because I talked to somebody who used to be a pass rush in the NFL. And like, I'd like to see the videos of him working on pass rush moves versus on the agility work, because we know that. And not to say that he's not. I think what catches people's eye are always the footwork and this and that. But not saying that, but that's what somebody would say. And I do think, like, I think the running through contact part is a big part of it, because that's both their games. They're not bend the corner Von Miller type.
The upside is 100% still there. Nobody's writing this thing off. Right now they're forecasting the top 2 picks to both be pass rushers this year. Like, and I don't think that'll happen because a quarterback always climbs up the boards. But like, it is still a marquee position in the NFL, and he still has the tools to be great at it. Like, are we critiquing him on a tough scale because he was a number 2 overall pick? Sure.
Yes.
We're demanding that greatness. He's not achieving it right now. Is he capable of achieving it? Oh, heck yes.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't see a lack of a talent out there with him. I saw a lack of production, and I think some of that lack of production was due to some of the ways he rushed. But I think it's because, again, I go back to that stutter step, and Rivera talked about that earlier this year. But when you go back and watch it, there was one game, the Bills game, it was pronounced. When he stutter stepped, he would get stoned and he'd drop off. When he didn't, he would apply pressure. And it's not quite that simple, but to a degree it is. So I think it's not far-fetched to think he can come back and have a good year.
Yeah, and he has to pay for the sins of the past a lot too, because how many talented guys have we seen roll through here who are told they're bigger than the organization, and that ends up creating issues. And then all of a sudden he's not at OTAs. Like, maybe in a vacuum, that's fine. But in light of everything that's happened here over the last 10 years, it's, oh crap, like, are we running down this road again?
Right. And let's be clear here. There's only one person bigger than the organization, and it's me. So they just have to stop that nonsense. So that's why I'm waiting for him to be called the Washington Johnny Cakes, something like that.
I've heard that new stadium in Berryville is going to be nice, but boy, I'm worried about the traffic on that 2-lane dirt road.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, you hit it, if you kill it, you eat it. That on the way out here. So, that's going to be the motto, and the brisket will be fresh. So, yeah. So
freshest tailgate in the NFL.
Yeah, there you go. But I agree with you. I don't think it's far-fetched at all to think that Chase has a bounce back year. The one thing about that kid too, I think it does matter to him, and there's no way that he's going to come back happy with what he showed this year. And it's not just about the sacks. I think there's a lot, but for them, it will be about the sacks. And I'll say this too, for people who didn't like him making commercials, those commercials dry up as a defensive end if you don't get sacks. Quarterbacks, we see Baker Mayfield, you don't have to be great for very long to continue those commercials, apparently. But with the ends, you better be in a national spotlight, and you get that with sacks. All right. Go ahead.
The only thing redeeming Progressive is that those commercials are so good, I'm willing to overlook the fact that Baker Mayfield has been a dud for the last 11 weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. Is the commercials, part of me is like, geez, you wish he'd play better because the commercials are kind of good that they continue. But again, for defensive ends, the commercial opportunities dwindle if you're not producing. And I think people who know that are the people who rep Chase Young and Montez. Last one, Jamin Davis. He talked about the style of the defense they played in college is different from the things that we asked him to do. So there's a lot of learning that was involved in that. And Rivera also brought up the fact that John Bostic was not out there helping him. And I think that's important. And I think it speaks to what he wants in the middle. And Cole Holcomb was not that guy. And it's not Cole's fault because he wasn't suited for that role, but he couldn't handle that role. I think it's the guy out there who's smart, who knows what they're doing. Now, you need a guy who's at a higher level than Bostic for them to succeed, but you need a guy that also knows what they're doing to help a guy like that. But I don't know. What do you see from Jamin? What did you see from Jamin this year, and what do you think for him going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll start with Ron, because Ron had Cam Newton in Carolina, and I think part of this Washington experience has been him appreciating how important a quarterback is. Ron has always had a great middle linebacker.
Yes.
Like, he just, going back to when he was a linebacker, like, he's been around talent. He was talent. Like, he would, going all the way back to the Bears, everywhere he's played, they've dominated at that position. And so when they drafted Jamin Davis, you say two things. One, it's a touch of a reach to take a linebacker that high in general.
Mm-hmm.
But two, if anybody is going to correctly identify who will be a star linebacker in the National Football League, it's this guy. Like, maybe Bill Belichick's number two because he's good at everything. But, like, if you were to say pick one head coach and he needs to go pick a linebacker to be his guy for the next 10 years, I think Ron's the guy of all 32 guys. Like, he knows it, man. He knows that position. He knows talent. So, that was what I said all offseason. It was like, I don't know. I don't know middle linebackers, but I trust Ron. Like, I trust Ron to identify it. And now we're running down this road. And boy, what a flashing warning light last week when David Mayo is out snapping him, when the decks are clear for him to get out there and play, and he's not playing. I know there's a million things going on. There's COVID going on. There's the off the field stuff going on. So I don't want to jump to conclusions based on that. But this is a monster offseason for Jamin Davis, because now if he's going to move to that outside slot, he doesn't just have to be good. He's got to be crazy good to justify that first round pick.
Right. I think that's a good point.
You don't have to be pretty good from the middle, as long as you're good at, like, calling the shots and commanding people and putting them in the right place. But if you're taking an outside linebacker in the first round, like, and not a 4-3, not a 3-4 outside linebacker like Kerrigan back in the day, like, but a 4-3 outside linebacker, like, you got to be crazy good to justify the first round. I don't see it at all. I continue to have a level of blind faith in Ron that this is a position he's good at, but boy, the early returns were just not promising at all.
Yeah, and there was a point during the year where I felt like he was developing, and he had a couple games where I'm like, okay, I see it. Like the Green Bay game, there was one play where it was bad, but overall, I thought he did a pretty good job. The Raiders game where he misses those tackles, the one thing that I liked about his game is that he was in position to make a number of plays. He just didn't. Now, he made a couple nice plays, but he missed 4 tackles that were key. And but the thing I liked is that, it starts with being in the right spot, and he was there to make plays. He didn't make them. That's what you have to do. But to your point, like, when he was drafted, you talk to people like, I think it was split, the people I talked to who felt he could be a middle linebacker for them. But he has speed, length, athleticism. The traits he has there are somewhat unique. So if you can tap into that, then I think he can help them. But I think your point is valid. It's when you look at how he's developing, is that a guy that you would say that it was worthy of the 19th pick? Well, that remains to be seen. And I do think he can help them. To what level? I think we'll find out. And I do think it'll help to have somebody else in the middle. It'll help them all. But then I wonder if you feel like Cole is playing a certain level and you have Jamin over here, how often are you using that base package versus the big nickel? And then if you're going to big nickel, then who's in the middle and who's out? And that's when we'll really start to see what they're looking at with it. So, but he's got to develop. And again, I felt like he made some strides in some areas, but he wasn't the guy that I would have picked there, in all honesty. I mean, I picked Koromoa for our draft.
Well, I think then you're watching him last night and you're like, oh boy, he's something right now already, like that's a little bit of salt in the wound.
Well, and I liked him because I felt like he played every bit to his speed. And I felt like he was aggressive when he'd come up and make tackles. So I felt like he would be a good playmaker for them. But, they're still not paying me to run this franchise, Michael, no matter how right I always
being
am.
the most important guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's shocking. And I know that, I don't know. One day they'll listen to these podcasts before the draft and say, you know what, this is what he's saying. We got to roll this way. Or they'll watch our ESPN mock draft and like, wait a minute, throw that out because Keim said this. So, but I think I've made a couple good picks. I'd have a hell of a team, I think. So at least that's what I'm telling myself. So there you go. I don't know if it's actually accurate, but it sounds good. So
it's easy to coach from the press box.
There you go.
Know that.
Yep, it is. So Michael, anyway, thanks a lot for coming on. Go back and enjoy the snow and have a good day, and we'll see you soon.
Looking forward to it. See you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Michael for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with another episode Thursday night. Talk to you next time.